Let's move on now and talk about this topic that just won't go away, and that is the imposition of VAT on private school fees. Well, the latest line, if you recall, the Labour Party said they would actually be able to recruit 6,500 extra teachers by the imposition of VAT onto private schools. Well, that's about 1.5 billion they estimate they will get back. But in the Times this morning, it says that is totally untrue. In fact, to recruit 6,500 extra teachers would cost £5 billion a year. So once again, the Labour Party mathematics does not add up. Back to school for them. Mark Lehane, Executive Head Teacher of Wootton Trust and a former advisor to the Department for Education, joins me now. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
This is ideological, it's ill thought through. They've slapped VAT on private schools. They don't understand. The vast majority of parents who send their kids to private schools aren't wealthy. They often do multiple jobs. They put their children first and foremost. They want them to have a good education, and now they're being penalised even though they're already paying for state education.
I mean, the interesting thing about this policy is we're now seeing in real time happening exactly what lots of us warned would happen when the policy was announced when Labour in opposition a couple of years ago. So no one ever knew, and no one really knows how much money that it will raise for the government, because we don't know how much of the extra tax and costs are going to be passed on to families. We're going to find that out over the next 6 months or so. We don't know how many families will then pull their children out of the private schools and put them into state schools, and therefore that money won't be gained. And also we don't know how many children will move into state schools, and therefore how much extra cost there will be for the government to pay for those places in state schools. It's a bit of a mess. And on top of that, the thing I've always wanted to know is where are these 6,500 extra teachers that we're being promised? Because if the Labour Party knew where they were when they were in opposition, it would have been nice if we could have been told then, because we could have done with those extra teachers back in the day. So it feels like a bit of a mess. But let's be really clear, the government are perfectly entitled to do this. It was in the manifesto. It was on this basis that lots of people voted for them. It's just really sad that we're going to see the consequences of that policy right now. So
you're right to question where are these 6,500 teachers. They're obviously sitting on some cloud somewhere that we're not familiar with. But I'd also like to know, for these children leaving the independent sector, where are the school places in the state system?
Well, the interesting thing is there are, across the country, across England, there are enough spare places in schools for quite a few number of kids to move from independent schools into state schools.
How many do you think?
Well, there probably are at any given time within an area. There could be anything between a few hundred in a local authority or a few dozen. The question is, are the places in the right, are the spaces in schools available in the right places, in the right schools for those children? And we are hearing across the system quite a few horror stories from families moving their children mid-year and really struggling to find their kids a place in the school that they want to send them to.
And that's the bit that I think is the most vindictive. It's in the middle of the school year, the kids are settled, they've got their friends, they're concentrating on their homework, and suddenly the government decides, oh, this is a brilliant idea, we'll disrupt your education. I'm sorry, that is not a duty of care.
Well, and of course, for lots of independent schools, you have to give them at least a full term's notice if you're going to pull your child out. And this policy wasn't passed until the early autumn, so lots of families were already committed to this financial year. I mean, listen, education, there's a bigger question here. Education in virtually every country on the planet is recognised as a charitable endeavour. We also have to be honest, OK? Lots of our independent schools, the ones that we're thinking of, the big, really expensive ones, they have lost track of their local community. They're not embedded in their local towns and cities and rural areas these days. They have focused largely on basically kids coming from wealthy, rich families. We can't deny that. Most families can't afford private school fees. However, there are lots of smaller independent schools doing a fantastic job, particularly in the special education sector, or particularly serving smaller communities that aren't the Eatons. They haven't got amazing facilities. They're getting by, and they're really serving lots of families.
But there's one other thing that... But there's one other thing that
hammered by this tax increase. They're the ones I'm most worried about.
100%. But also the other thing the Labour government doesn't seem to understand is actually these independent schools offer bursaries to those people who are less well off. Now, if they don't have the revenue and the income, those bursaries will go, so the scholarships will be out the window. Also, they open their sports facilities. This is part of the deal to be a charitable or to have charitable status. They open their state-of-the-art sports facilities to local children and local families, as they do where I live. And that will stop.
Absolutely, they're going to have to make savings where they can, and it's really important that you've mentioned the bursaries things. In recent times, lots of independent schools have been offering far more places to children to come to them regardless of their ability to pay, particularly children from that are in the care system that could really benefit from the stability of a boarding school and independent school. The number of schools offering those bursaries are now collapsing because they've got to make savings elsewhere. So the most vulnerable kids who would have most benefited from going to private schools are the ones that are losing out the most. And we mustn't forget as well, this is at the same time that this government are taking away state schools' freedoms to innovate and improve things for their children, because they're going to force a new national curriculum on all state schools like the ones that I run. They're going to take away the freedom that head teachers like myself have in terms of how we can employ staff and how we can deploy them, because in the law that they're going to pass, they are going to determine the paying conditions upon which I can appoint people. So this isn't just the independent sector that's facing these changes right now. The whole state education system in England is about to lose a lot of the freedoms that have made it become one of the most successful school systems in the world. And that's the thing your viewers and listeners need to know. Schools in England have got so much better over the last 10, 15 years. You can see it in the international rankings against other countries in maths, English and science. The very things that helped us do that are now at risk.
And also BBC Verify, there's another line this morning. BBC Verify says that private school fee rises after the VAT raid don't matter to parents. That's a load of tosh. Of course they matter to parents. I'll gloss over that. But just in terms of the sheer numbers, 500,000 kids in independent education, that saves about 4.5 billion quid to the Treasury. Now, if you see this exodus, which we think we will see, so 5,500 already leaving the independent sector, 10,000 fewer pupils enrolling. So if the numbers are way out of kilter, which is probably accurate given the government's track record in getting numbers right, then the government is going to be in for a nasty shock.
Yes, and also over time, the number of people that we'll see going into the independent sector is likely to fall lots, because people that maybe would have chosen to enter their child into a primary school age 4 or a secondary school age 11, they won't do that. They'll come into the state system, so there'll be less tax raised and more money needed to be spent in state schools, whereas lots of people that are in the system at the moment will probably try and eke it out until their child finishes primary school or finishes their GCSEs. So we could see a big change in the numbers. We could see far less money raised. We could see far more people come into the state system. So overall, the government may end up worse off, and they may find they're putting more pressure on the state system, which is already struggling with a shortage of teachers in subjects like science and maths and computing. It's a really tricky time right now, because no one really knows how it's going to pan out. And like I said, you have to look at it in the broader context that there's loads of more restrictions and rules going to be imposed on state schools generally to make it harder for us to deal with the children that we teach.
Mark, thank you for your time. That's Mark Lehane there, Executive Head Teacher at Wootton Trust, former advisor to the Department for Education.